speak out on it.
Okay, cool. So some sort of scholars have sort of raised the point that there seems to be kind of a trade-off between justice and peace, in the sense that
Justice and peace.
between justice and peace. So it seems like warlords seem reluctant to come to the negotiation table if they're indicted, right? And so I'm wondering, for the victims who actually suffer under these warlords, what is better for them? Is it better to have peace now and stay the hand of justice, or continue to pursue sort of justice? And I think we could even give the example of the South African TRC. We stayed the hand of justice in the name of peace. So how do we reconcile this seeming trade-off between justice and peace?
Look, I don't believe it should be a trade-off. In many cases it is. I believe justice and peace go well together, and in many cases they are the reverse sides of the same coin. But clearly it would be almost ridiculous to deny that there cannot be situations where justice can make peace more difficult. Where doing justice may make peace negotiations more difficult. If a warlord knows that if he makes peace he'll end up in prison, he's not going to make peace. That's the argument. I understand it. But it doesn't happen too frequently. In fact, I don't know of a single case. I'd invite anyone to give me an example of where justice has delayed peace or made peace more difficult. It can happen. But the experience thus far is the opposite. I'll give you one personal example, which I rather enjoyed in the result. When I issued the first indictment against Kowdich and Mladic in July of 1995, the war was going on, and they were trying to put an end to the war in the former Yugoslavia, which had killed already a few 100,000 people and injured probably over 1 million people. And my job was to investigate and issue indictments against people who we found evidence had committed some of the most serious crime known to history. And I had no doubt that my job was, if there was evidence, as there was against Kowdich and Mladic, to issue the indictment. I got an immediate summons. One part I must tell you, which is not without interest. I decided before announcing that we were going against Kowdich and Mladic to give private warning on a need-to-know basis to the UN, because there were then UN troops fighting in Bosnia, and I thought some crazies might well attack UN troops because their hero had been indicted. I thought I should give the same notice to the International Committee of the Red Cross, to the refugee, to UNHCR, and to the Dutch government. And I informed Yasushi Akashi, who was the senior UN diplomat in the former Yugoslavia. He came to meet me in Geneva, and I told him that on Monday week I'm going to announce this indictment. And I think you should warn your battalion commanders to be extra careful on Monday week. He said, I appreciate your telling me. He said, may I tell the Secretary General what was guarded? And I said, Mr. Akashi, it's your decision. I've asked you on a need to know. If you feel you have to tell the Secretary General, tell him. I prefer you didn't, but it's your decision. And he said, well, I must tell you, I feel I have to inform him. So I knew Butruscani was being informed. I hear nothing, and we announced, had a big press conference on the following Monday. And on the next day I get a message that Butruscani wants me to come and see him immediately in New York. So I arrange a flight from Amsterdam to New York, and I go and see the Secretary General, who was in one of his bad moods. I found he was a very mercurial character. He was in a wonderful mood or a bad mood, and his mood seemed to have nothing to do with the topic. But yeah, it was a bad mood day, and he was not pleasant. And he said, how dare you issue an indictment against Kowdich and Mladic when the war was raging, and you know we're trying to make peace. And I said, well, Secretary General, that's my job. I've been told to do it by the Security Council. And I'd be in violation of my office if I didn't. But I said, incidentally, you knew a week ago that it was coming because Mr. Akashi told you. He said, yes, but the Security Council statute says that the prosecutor is independent and may take no orders from any government or any other person. And he said, I couldn't approach you, but you should have approached me, which was a funny interpretation of independence. But I said, and had our co-prosecutor have told me not to issue the indictment, and he said, yes. I said, well, then I'm glad I didn't approach you. And he said, if you didn't approach me, the President, Judge Kasese, should have approached me for advice. He said, in my country, a prosecutor wouldn't issue a serious indictment without consulting the government. I said, I'm happy to say in my country now that there would be no such collaboration between the prosecution and the government. But said Butros-Ghali, Kasese should have approached me. And I said, well, in fairness to Judge Kasese, he couldn't approach you because I didn't consult him either. He didn't know about it. And that was Butros-Ghali's attitude. Little did he know, little did I know, that Srebrenica would follow 2 months after the indictment, as I mentioned, and that in November of 1995, the Americans would call the meeting a Dayton, Ohio, that in effect brought the war to an end. Now, if Karadzic had not been indicted, there would have been no meeting at Dayton. Karadzic would have insisted on being there, for sure. And had he gone there, the Bosnian leader, President Izetbegovic, would not have been seen dead in the same room as Karadzic, responsible for the massacre at Srebrenica a few months before. But because Karadzic had been indicted, he couldn't go to Dayton. He would have been arrested by the Americans and sent for trial to The Hague. So the indictment, here justice in fact aided the peace, enabled the war to be brought to an end. I didn't know, Butros-Ghali didn't know. So one doesn't know, and I don't believe that prosecutors should become politicians. I didn't know what the politics was, what the peace negotiations were. Not my job. I don't have people in the office who are privy to what is going on. So I think if there are cases, and there may be, as I've conceded, if there are cases where the peace is inhibited and more people are killed, that may be one of the costs of international justice. But I think it will be the exception and not the rule. You know, another personal example, when I was on the Kosovo Commission, my successor as Chief Prosecutor, Louise Arbour from Canada, issued an indictment against Milosevic during the bombing, during those 78 days. And the political leaders came down on her like a ton of bricks. You crazy, we're trying to bring the bombing to an end and you indict Milosevic. We're trying to get him to agree to a peace treaty that NATO is trying to impose. And you issue an indictment, Louise Arbour. The bombing came to an end and Milosevic capitulated. And I asked both negotiators. The negotiators were from the UN, Viktor Chernomyrdin, the former Russian Prime Minister, and the then President of Finland, representing the EU, Martti Ahtisaari. And I interviewed them each separately, Chernomyrdin in Moscow and Ahtisaari in Helsinki. And they both told me the same thing. They said they were horrified when Louise Arbour issued the indictment. How on earth can we go and negotiate a capitulation by Milosevic when he's now under indictment? And I said, and they said it was irrelevant. Milosevic didn't raise it, wasn't on his agenda. He had no question in his mind that he would end up in The Hague. He had his holidays at home, he had his medical treatment at home, and the last thing he thought would happen was that his people would rise up against him, and that his successor, President Gingrich, would hand him over for trial at The Hague. So one doesn't know. But all I can say is I don't believe that the possibility of justice working against peace instead of with peace is a reason for not having international criminal justice.